brief and entertaining, I guess. I don't have a song and dance prepared, but I think our plans will be exciting enough. So I'm starting with just an introduction of who we are, reminding you about our team, which you all should be familiar with at this point. I'll talk about sort of all the work that's happened before this project to set the stage to where we are today. Early in the project, we created a framework plan that we shared with a lot of people, and even with this board, with this commission, so I'll touch on that. I'll remind us all about all the stakeholder engagement we did throughout this process and what we heard and the feedback we sought from others. And then I'll end on final plans and materials, along with the construction and the rest of this project schedule as we move towards the end of the project. Okay, so our team, the top 3 members of this team, you've seen probably a lot of us. Louis Johnson and I worked together on the downtown master plan with Riviera Architects as well. So I think he was in front of this commission several times. John Eckler here is with me. He's leading the transportation portion of the project, and I'm a landscape architect and planner and the project manager. We have another, lots more staff that have been helping us with this project, and alongside Jim Walters with Riviera Architects is also helping us as well. So,
could you put that back over? That is not John
I know, what happened to his face?
This is what happens when you spot check. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
You're
Being
fine.
ignorant.
Actually, reintroduce myself to him. So the downtown master plan is where Gresham Smith and my involvement started with this project, but I want to show this picture because ultimately the groundwork for this project, the Streetscape project, started a long time ago with the roadway diet, and thanks to the city and all the efforts that went into that, I know it was a tough process to get to where that was implemented, at least from what I've heard, all the stories I've heard. It took a long time to get to that point, but from everything I've heard, that's really paid off, and people have seen the improvements from that road diet. It's really laid the groundwork for where we are today. So I just want to acknowledge that it didn't just start with the downtown master plan. But during the master plan, I wanted to show this slide because it talks about, it reminds me of all the things I heard, because not only do we have public engagement during this project, but during the downtown master plan, we met with lots of people and heard lots of feedback about a variety of different things related to downtown. But one, a lot of things related to the streetscape kept coming up. And, things like improving the open space and adding site amenities to create more desirable experiences along that downtown corridor. Safety came up over and over and over as a really important piece to consider downtown. From vehicular safety to pedestrian safety, everybody recognized that those intersections are really problematic, and we need to do something to address that. And then, people expressed the desire to make downtown more walkable, a place where people wanted to go, experience different things. We would talk to students at Center that say they never walk downtown. And so it just kind of amazed us at this great, beautiful downtown, and how can we make it more vibrant, walkable, and get people down there and experiencing it. 3 themes came from the master plan. And one of those themes was make streets for people. We heard over and over that not only Main Street, but 4th and 3rd are really problematic for people walking those corridors, and how can we reallocate the right-of-way space for pedestrians, bicyclists, people walking instead of driving everywhere. These were some slides that Louis Johnson presented during the downtown master plan, where we started to look at diagrammatically what could we do with the streets in the core of downtown. So we're showing kind of a glimpse at, if we build out these curb extensions at the intersections, it really shortens the distance of crosswalks, making it a lot safer. People standing on those bump outs also are a lot more visible to the traffic, so the traffic would see them when they're making turning movements. We also recognize that there's leftover space in the vehicular roadway, and we could reallocate that space to pedestrians. Here's another example of what we looked at. Mid-block bump outs would also provide safety where people are pulling out of driveways that cross the pedestrian zone. Thinking about those spaces as permanent parklets. We tested out temporary parklets. There was a lot of success with that and a lot of interest in those. So how can we make those permanent and create that space along Main Street? We pointed out that third and fourth, in our downtown master plan studies, and that we looked at traffic counts and we looked at crash data. Those intersections had really problematic data associated with them. So we knew that those intersections, and even the one at Walnut and Fourth too, had some problems that we wanted to address, that we knew should be addressed.
Well, this is part of the, maybe unintended consequence of this is slowing people down a little bit. Is that something y'all think about, or is that just, you assume that will happen when you do it, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. Slowing traffic down is part of the intent behind this, absolutely. Now, John can talk a little bit later when we're talking about safety and traffic. We ultimately looked at the traffic counts and did traffic studies to make sure that slowdown doesn't interrupt traffic backup, right? So those things all came into play when we were addressing those items. So when we started with the streetscapes, two projects coming together. When we started with the streetscapes, we had a pretty good foundation of what we knew we wanted to do here. We knew we wanted to reallocate some of that extra space in the streets to the pedestrian zones. So already we're bumping the majority of the sidewalks out. And then we're bumping out even further in some locations to create these permanent, almost parklet spaces. Space that will provide dining areas for businesses that are adjacent. Spaces where people can sit and be social. Perhaps there's space where a musician can set up and play on a Friday night to the crowd that's sitting and dining. So all of that extra space becomes almost park-like in this linear fashion along Main Street. In that framework, that's sort of the moment when we first reached out to KYTC. We shared with them our plans. We talked through the intent, what the city's intent. We wanted to slow down traffic. We wanted to make these intersections safer for pedestrians and vehicular movements. So we shared with them this plans and other plans that we had. We walked through different traffic counts and to make sure that they knew what the intent was. So that way, looking ahead, throughout this process, they know what we're doing, they're on board, and when it comes to permitting, it'll be a smooth sailing, and that they're bought into this idea of the plan for the city. But what you see on the screen here, most of you have probably seen this plan before, but we're really thinking about space, not only the sort of the curb alignment where things are bumping out and improving those intersections, but we're looking at the purple is sort of that extra amenity zone. That's that permanent park space. The orange is the sidewalk. That's a clear space that we're making sure nothing that's on the streets interrupts that zone where people are going to be walking. It's really wide. It's 10 feet wide. And then we have the building zone. It's the dark blue right up next to the buildings. That can be spaces where businesses can pull out tables and chairs or racks of clothing or signs. So that way that kind of feels like their personal kind of space up next to the building. So that was really how we were thinking about a framework for the streetscape as we move forward with plans. As I said before, we met with KYTC early on and often throughout the process, but we met with a lot of other people as well. Right at the beginning of the project, obviously COVID has had a lot of interruptions in our process. We met first off virtually with the business owners and property owners along this corridor, and we talked through, before we even had anything on paper, what did people want to see? What was the main goals for them? What did they want in this streetscape? And we had a lot of good feedback. A lot of it repeated sort of and reinforced those things that we heard in the downtown master plan about safety, about vibrancy, about using these spaces for really economic growth for the businesses that are already there or future businesses. We met with city officials and administrators, fire and police. We had a general public meeting down at City Center where we opened it up and anybody could come by and provide feedback for us. And then, of course, we've met with you all, the commission, several times throughout this process. And most recently, we met with the Streetscape committee as well and had some really enthusiastic response from them. So. This is what the final Streetscape plans look like. I know it's very hard to read because it's such a large area, but I'm going to zoom in on a couple of spaces and break it down into all the pieces and parts of the plan. So what are the big things that we're doing with this plan? You'll see the dark blue along 4th Street is where we're burying utilities. Overhead utilities will go underground. The 4 intersections are highlighted to show we're doing improvements at those intersections for safety. Along the corridor, both on Main Street and 4th Street, there's permanent bump outs for permanent park spaces. And then all along those streetscapes, we're improving the pedestrian zones, replacing materials, adding new amenities such as benches and trash cans and those such things. But I'll walk through each of these pieces step by step to show you what I'm talking about. And first I'll let John Eckler speak about the safety pieces that we're doing to the project, because that's really, I think, the foundation where we started from, to make sure we had those in place before all the extra stuff.
Okay, so to your question, yes. Part of this, as you move the curb lines in, move the parked cars closer to the through traffic, it will slow folks down. The friction that creates, it's just unnatural. If you've been in an area where things kind of tighten up on you just a little bit, your natural reaction is to go slow. It's what we refer to as a self-enforcing road. You know, speed limits are great. We put them out there. We ask people to abide by them, but they don't always. If you give them a reason to slow down, make them feel not completely uncomfortable, but just slightly uncomfortable, they will slow down and they'll be able to look around and see what's going on around them. The 3 intersections along Main Street will all have their signals replaced. The one at 4th is being taken care of through KYTC, and that one is underway, may get done ahead of some of the other work. I know Josh has been coordinating with them and may be able to provide some more details on that. But the other 2 at 2nd and 3rd, we've been coordinating so they will look and feel the same. There won't be a difference between the signals that are replaced as part of the streetscape and what KYTC replaces. They will all be the mast arm type design. So if you've seen any of those in downtown Lexington that are on a fixed arm, they're not on the cable. So it'll be that type of system out there. Also, at all of those intersections are some of those bump outs that Aaron was talking about. The curb line will move out to the edge of the parking zone so that as people need to cross the street and they're waiting and queuing up there, they're visible to the folks in their cars. So you can get that start, and then there's some tricks we do with the signals to do pedestrian lead times. So during the all red phase, the pedestrian signal will go green, give you the walk, so that they can get a head start ahead of the green light for the adjacent traffic to go. So you're already there, and you're in sort of front of the cars before they go to make a turn and create that conflict for you all. So there's things like that that are going to be done. Some of that's already in play downtown, but that, when you refresh everything, you shorten that crossing distance. That's another thing that makes it safer. It's literally limiting the time that you're out there exposed to traffic. So all of those things, we hope to make this a little bit more inviting for folks to get out and walk around and not just drive through town as they're going through. 4th Street, as Aaron mentioned, the overhead utilities are all going to be underground. That will just sort of help the area feel a little bit bigger, even though that is not a direct impact on the traffic that's flowing through get those big, those are some nice tall poles, you get those out of the way, just sort of the experience driving through town can be that much better.
All right, everyone's favorite subject, parking. We've talked a lot about parking during the master plan and during this project. We've really tried to provide a balance as we worked through this project. We knew that providing permanent parklets was going to reduce parking along Main Street. And so we could have kept going and adding more and more and more parklets. The whole thing could have been parklets. But at that point, we lose a lot of parking. So we found a balance, or what we feel like is a balance. We've talked this over with multiple stakeholder groups. While we initially on Main Street in this corridor had 56 spaces, we now have 36 spaces, and you can see the bubbles are counts of those spaces on each block. But we are adding 6 spots along South 4th Street and 3 spots along North 3rd Street. So overall, we just have a net negative of 11 spaces. That's what we're losing, but we feel what we're gaining offsets that. We've had conversations with the city about possibly signing lots, public lots that could be usable after work hours for more businesses downtown, for folks to utilize those spaces in the future. That would really help offset some of this parking that we're losing. And the red dots on the screen are highlights where there are handicap spaces. 3 of those are Sunday only for the church, but those will be marked in the future as well to maintain those handicap spaces. So the pedestrian space, by the numbers, we're adding a lot of pedestrian space. If you count the amount of space we're adding by bumping out the curb and adding by creating these bump outs, the space along Main Street and the space along 3rd and 4th are almost the same size as Wizziger Park. So we're talking about 20,000, 21,000 square feet of public space being added to this downtown core. That's a significant amount of space. Within that, I've highlighted in the black squares kind of the sort of parklet areas that would have space for benches and cafe seating. Other things like bike racks will be in those spaces. Along the whole project, we have about 32 bike racks right now. We're showing 19 litter receptacles, 34 benches, and about 4,000 square feet of cafe seating. Now, this seating wouldn't be provided by the city. It would be space for those businesses to put cafe seating out there. We've had discussions with the city about that, and really the strategy behind that is ABC laws and liquor laws. If the city provided that furniture, the businesses would not be able to sell a beer to somebody sitting there. So the city will provide that space, but the businesses themselves would put in place those cafe tables. So what if we zoom in, what does some of this look like? And I have more 3D renders later that we'll be able to kind of see and imagine what those spaces look like even more. But this is kind of zooming into just a corner. This is the 3rd Street intersection right here. And so the block between 3rd and 4th, you kind of see right here. What we're trying to do here in these spaces is first and foremost safety and accessibility. That's where we started with the foundation of traffic and slowing traffic down and making the corridor safer. We're making sure that sidewalk is accessible. Entering and exiting buildings and egress, that's accessible. We're activating the public space along this corridor, which we heard over and over. We're doing that through different lighting techniques, which I'll talk about later. We're providing seating. We're providing shade for people through street trees, so it feels comfortable out there in that space. Again, these permanent parklets, we feel will be economic drivers to businesses downtown and those spaces that are for lease, all in an effort to create vibrancy. And so this kind of shows an example of what that looks like. You see it, this is right kind of in front of the pizza pub, where we have a really big long space. Some of it's dedicated to public benches and seating, and some of it's dedicated to We show little cafe tables there, but that's where sort of that cafe seating would be. You also see the sort of bump outs that are happening at the intersections to really create this sort of safer moment with shorter crosswalks, high visibility because of all the lighting. So this is kind of a glimpse of what that might look like. So tree canopies, I mentioned there'll be trees out there. Right now there's 27 trees out there along Main Street, none along 4th through 3rd. So we are replacing those 27 trees. We're adding 24 more trees along Main Street. We're adding 6 on 4 and 8 on 3rd. So you can kind of get a glimpse of what that looks like on this overall plan. But I'll kind of zoom into an area just so you can kind of start to see what does that look like when you kind of take a closer look.
What kind of tree are we talking about? Not a ginkgo?
Not a ginkgo. No, I heard that loud and clear multiple
Smells like
times. Not a ginkgo.
Pass it down.
No, I have some slides later on, but essentially we selected, I think there's about 6 or 7 different tree types. We worked with the ag extension woman in this area to really kind of, I suggested some, she suggested some alternatives. Really, we were looking for species that are really tolerant of these urban conditions, ones where their roots don't come up and push up the sidewalks. We look for ones that have a high canopy, meaning that their trunk is pretty high before they start branching out. So that way that those limbs won't be in front of the businesses when you're looking through, you see those trunks. We also selected trees for texture and seasonality, right? Some things that are going to look good all year round. So, but in general, the sort of spacing of the trees is every 40 feet. The lighting is every 40 feet, so you get this repetition of lighting tree, lighting tree, lighting tree. So that's kind of what we started with. And then in certain areas, we added more. You'll see up along the park, we added a second row to create sort of an alley in front of the park right there. So you'll have this nice kind of double tree canopy moment as you walk in front of the park. And then we do have a couple of raised plant beds at some special moments and corners. We heard over and over about people wanting pretty flowers and nice landscaping, and we see that out there right now. That's something that's important to downtown Danville. So there are some of those. You'll see them in this example right here, where we have a couple of raised beds. In that moment, that kind of creates this sort of garden parklet instead of a cafe-focused park, permanent park. It's a little garden space. So we have 2 benches tucked between those raised beds there to create this little magical moment space. And of course, adding trees along 4th Street where there are none right now, that'll be a huge improvement. I mentioned lighting, so this is an overall image of what the lighting would be like. Now, the spread of the lighting is not representative of the spread of the lighting. It's really just to show you all where the lights would be. I don't have that accurate footprint of the lighting in this actual image. But what we have throughout the corridor along Main Street is pedestrian scale lighting. Those are 12 foot tall, and the acorn lights are shined towards the sidewalk. And then we have vehicular lights shining towards the road. Those are 25 feet tall. Those vehicular lights happen at the ends of the blocks and at the center of the blocks, and we've run photometric calculations to make sure that from a vehicular and a KYTC standpoint, those vehicular lights are meeting the standards and the safety through the corridor. The pedestrian lights are happening, like I said, every 40 feet in that kind of rhythm along Main Street. In addition to that, we also have cafe lighting in certain areas. This is like overhead little cafe circle lights. I'll show you some pictures of what that looks like. And then we also have bollards in certain areas, and those are lighted as well. So if we zoom in on a location, this is actually between 3rd and 2nd Street. So you'll see the hub is there. And this is kind of what it looks like close up. And so at the ends of the blocks and at the mid blocks, we have vehicular lights. Throughout the sidewalks, we have pedestrian lights. And in certain areas where we have bollards, those are lit. And then we have the cafe lights over the certain parklet areas. And so we spoke with the Streetscape committee. We're working on making sure that all the lights are this warm tone, they all match, they look nice, and they match with the current lights that are out there downtown, the Acorn traditional style. And our approach to this was a layered lighting effect. If you think about it at night and you're walking through the corridors, some spots will be brighter and more active. Those are where the cafes are kind of happening. And some spots will be calmer with just with a nice lighting for your social kind of bench moment. So it'll create vibrancy at night, something that's kind of different than you would normally see with I think especially with the cafe lighting. Oh, also, of course, we're providing outlets at the trees, extra conduit for future needs of the city. So that's been a topic that we've been discussing and making sure that we're planning for those things. So moving forward, I'm going to talk about the materials, what we've selected to go into these spaces that we're looking at. And when we started thinking about the materials, of course, we had several goals that helped us kind of define what the approach would be. We wanted to make sure that the streetscape is accessible. We've heard over and over problems with people out there today on Main Street tripping over bricks or issues with pavement heaving and stuff like that. So we want to make sure what we do here is accessible. We also want to make sure it's timeless and sophisticated. I say that because the architecture that's beautiful along Main Street needs to stand out. And so we want to make sure we're doing this right the first time, that this is a simple sort of almost backdrop to that architecture that is so elegant and beautiful. So we want to make sure that the materials here are right and let that architecture shine. We also want to make sure that what we choose is long-term, it lasts, really very durable. Thinking about, okay, a lot of times, cities have to go in and repair lines underneath sidewalks, and what happens when you're cutting that material out and replacing it. So we want to make sure what we plan, we can do that pretty easily. And of course, we're talking about vibrant spaces. How do we get people downtown, get them using this space? So how do we incorporate that into the materials that we choose? So we looked at the streetscape guidelines, and the existing guidelines and our core guidelines match up with those zones that we talked about earlier, the building zones, the sidewalk zones, and the amenity zones. So in the existing guidelines, the building zones designate that area to be bricks, those historic red bricks, clay bricks in front of that. And the city has seen some challenges with those over the past few years, and has actually gone to replacing that area with concrete. So some of that's already happening. The sidewalk zone in the guidelines talks about a diamond scored concrete pattern. And the amenity zone calls for stamped concrete. This gives the appearance of a cobble kind of stone, flagstone. It is stained and needs to be refinished over time. So when we are looking and thinking about this core area, we came up with some recommendations for this downtown core. For the building zone, we agree. Let's use concrete there, right? It makes the most sense. It's up next to a building. Bricks or pavers can often become a challenge right up next to a building and a vertical surface. So we're suggesting that space up next to the building stays concrete. And the sidewalk zone, that should stay concrete. We want that to be concrete because it's a flat, accessible surface. If you think about the sidewalks right now in this area with the ribbons of brick pavers that cross that concrete, those are what are causing those problems if you're walking just straight down the sidewalk. So we want that to be all concrete, and we think that concrete should go all the way to the edges, to the crosswalks. That you should have a clear, even, nice concrete surface all the way down the ramps and across the crosswalks. We are also suggesting that the scoring in this area is straight scoring instead of the diamond pattern. That, along with the paver application in the amenity zone, I'll talk about those two and why we think those long-term management-wise are better for this zone. So also in the amenity zone for this downtown core, we're suggesting that we use a pressed paver in this area over a concrete base. So this concrete base is, a thick basically a sidewalk underneath your pavers, right? So those pavers are set on top of an asphalt setting bed, then the pavers go on, and then they're backfilled with polymeric sand. What that does is, one, it provides a very stable situation where those pavers should have very little to no movement. But what it also does is, if the city needs to get in and repair something that's underneath the sidewalk, they can easily pick up those pavers can be moved, we can cut into the concrete, repair the thing, put the concrete back, and replace those pavers. So they're a very manageable system. These pavers are not brick or clay pavers, they're pressed stone pavers. They're extremely durable, very long lasting, and are used all across the country. So that's really our recommendation. And then the concrete, the scoring, the straight scoring, again, that's just for long-term maintenance. If you need to cut through that concrete in a diamond pattern, that can be very challenging. You're cutting horizontally across a diamond pattern. To come back and match that is very, very difficult long-term. So here's what that looks like when we zoom into that area. Again, we've talked about these zones before. Normally, on the skinnier part, that's an 8-foot parking zone, 6 feet of amenity space, 10 feet of pedestrian zone, and 3 feet of frontage zone. So in the sort of permanent parklet areas, that's a 14-foot space that you get in those enhanced amenity zones. And out in the median, the delivery median that we're keeping, we're recommending that is pavers as well, set on top of a heavy-duty concrete with a curved flush ribbon. So that's a flush space that trucks would drive on top of. But what it does is it breaks up that asphalt. When you look out across the corridor, you visually see this different material. It's a different texture. So it just provides another layer of texture and beauty to the corridor. So again, these are some of the elements we've been talking about the whole time. The paver pattern, what we're suggesting here is a linear European paving pattern. It has different sizes and varieties, but it's not too busy. We're suggesting having medium to light gray colors, really a neutral setting again for the beautiful architecture that is behind it all. Here's just a close-up of, you see the bollards that are on the edge of the bump out, really to provide that extra feeling of security between people sitting and spending time on these benches and the traffic that's running beside them. Again, this is just a reminder, these buildings are beautiful. They have a lot of color and a lot of interest. So we want this streetscape to be timeless and set the stage for what's there already that's beautiful. And so I showed that picture just because our images, we don't have the ability to fold them in to really see what that building looks like. We just have a box in the background, but you can imagine that beautiful historic building behind here. But this is a glimpse of what that cafe space would look like. You see those cafe lights down there on the left, and these social areas, those trees are providing nice shade. You'll have lights in the evening. So just kind of a glimpse of what that space would look like. And from another angle, this is what it might be. And again, this is what the streetscape looks like today. And here's what it could look like in the future. Here's a glimpse of the corner at 3rd Street. And here's, again, what that corner could look like in the future. And turning around to just looking at sort of that permanent parklet space, what that will feel like and look like. So the components of the streetscape, again, all these amenities that we're adding to it, we're using the litter receptacle and benches that are in the streetscape guidelines. These lights are a little bit like what those cafe lights that we're talking about over those spaces, and an image of the bollard that would be lit as well. Back to your question about the trees, here's the slide that talks about the species, but we already went over that. Again, we're just making sure that the species that we select are tolerant to these urban conditions. We're also putting in the infrastructure to make sure that those trees are healthy long term. Right? We're building in soil cells, these cellular modular systems underground that keep soil space for those roots to grow and live in, and so they don't get impacted over time and die, become unhealthy. And at this point, I'll let John speak again about construction phasing and maintenance of traffic, because that's been a topic of discussion recently.
Great question on the trees, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Depending on the species, how often should trees be changed?
I mean, as long as they're healthy, they shouldn't be changed. You know, right now, they should be changed because everybody is experiencing this poor selection of species.
Well, it's also pushing up the concrete.
Right.
At some point, will that be a problem?
No, we're planning everything in our ability so that way that does not happen.
And the other thing is that they grow so large and wide, if you've got a business downtown, signage you can't see until you're right in front of that building.
Yeah, so that's why we're trying to select species that they branch high, right?
Columnar, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that way the limbs aren't down, you know, below a 10-foot line. Now they'll start off small and they'll have to grow up to be that way, but absolutely.
All right, so everybody's favorite subject, how do we build it? I've sent Josh over a draft. These things often get negotiated. It's a back and forth with the city, with the folks that own businesses down there. This is kind of our first run at this. So we talked about 4th Street and undergrounding, placing the utilities underground. So there's going to be some duct work that has to go in initially. The contractor can do that work. The utility companies will then have a period of time where they have to come in and pull their cable through and get their facility set up to operate underground before we can remove all of the overhead components there. So we envision the 4th Street work starting right away. What that means is one lane gets closed on 4th Street. We're also working with Josh to set up a test case for that, to prove to KYTC that will work long term. So that may actually happen ahead of construction, where we get that lane closed, restripe that area, to do a little bit of research to prove to KYTC that one lane there for the after condition will be an acceptable scenario. But so we'll do that work, and then at the same time start on Main Street on the south side of the road. We'll take traffic and move all the traffic to the north, so the center turn lane and the storage lane would be used for through traffic to give as much space to the contractor as possible. We do that because the contractor has to build this while also maintaining pedestrian traffic. So initially, for that little sub area where pedestrians are walking, we envision the contractor working out and getting the curb out into the road and allow pedestrians to be adjacent to the buildings and walking up close to the buildings while their work area is sort of in between the pedestrian and the road. As they get those elements in place and some of that sidewalk is complete, the pedestrians will move out towards the road. They in fact have to use some parts of the road as their sidewalk as they're moving up and down the road. And the contractor will provide temporary connections into the businesses. And we put notes in there to generally allow Josh to manage that together with business owners so that there's going to be disruptions, but we minimize the disruptions to the extent practical. Once that work is done, we simply move to the north side of the road. So we flip traffic, we push it as far to the south as we can. Again, maintaining 2 lanes only. Give them as much room on the north side of the road to work as they can. Again, repeating the same pattern. Move the curb out, keep pedestrians adjacent to the buildings, and then move them out as they need to there. Some of the hardscape elements, the sidewalks, those different zones that Aaron talked about, we try to keep that in mind as we go through this so that those joints are in a way that it actually makes it easier for us to maintain the pedestrian traffic along the way. The intent, again, the initial set of notes I provided to Josh, no work starts prior to June 6th. So the Brass Band Festival goes off with no construction equipment out there in the way. We start this on June 6th. Again, the idea, each of those moves on Main Street, we anticipate taking about 2 months. So 2 months to do the south side of the road, 2 months to do the north side of the road. The median is sort of a Josh option. If there's time to get that done before the end of November, the contractor's free to do so. If the contractor can't get that done before November 1st, he's not to start. The idea is that we want to get those sidewalks and the hardscape, maybe not every tree, maybe not every light, but get as much of that in place in time for the holiday season so businesses can operate, I'll say normally, during that time of year. And then in the spring, when the weather warms back up, contractor will move back in and finish the median area and whatever trees might need to be done, with the goal that the project is entirely complete by May 15th of next year. Again, ahead of the Brass Band Festival, so that there's not a bunch of equipment out there causing problems and in the way of that. 4th Street, the work will be going on sort of the entire time. Again, the conduit will go in first, then the contractor sort of has to leave that area while the utilities do that work. We anticipate that work for the utilities taking about 4 months to get everything underground, energized, and get the poles and equipment down. And then phase, I completely skipped that. Phase 3, while that median work is going on, we anticipate that block is closed. So we have 2 of these median areas, so we anticipate 2 complete closures on Main Street. We don't want to give them the entire length because people need to come and go. So between 2nd and 3rd, they get 1 10-day closure to get the median done. So that's, pedestrians will still be able to come and go along the edges, but vehicles will be completely out. The contractor will have that area to excavate, get the heavy-duty base in, and get the pavers down. And basically, 2 weekends in the week in between is the idea. Once you get 2nd and 3rd done, as weather and time allows, then you move to 3rd and 4th and repeat. Close the road, excavate that area, and get the medians back installed.
Y'all, sure done this at how do you notify the business owners that, Monday we're gonna be, in front of your door, or your block's gonna be shut down?
So in the case of the shutdowns, what we've asked the contractor is to give Josh and the city a 2-week notice. And then notifications will go out. I assume that Josh probably has some regular communication with everyone, either through maybe the Streetscape committee or some other groups. Could be a city Facebook page. There's lots of ways to handle that. And also you go knock on, go into the business and talk to them and say, here's what we're going to do. And we try not to be too restrictive. We try to give the contractor ground rules as far as, we don't want any time where they're completely blocked off in a business. It may not be exactly the same access. It may be slightly modified access, but the idea is there'll be access to all the businesses when they're open. Now, if there's, something that can be done to say, hey, look, can we do it on a weekend or something closed? Again, we try to leave that flexibility there for Josh to communicate that and talk with the contractor and business owners to get that work done.
Earl, do you remember when we did that little piece that we've done already, that people seemed surprised when we had to dig up in front of the front door?
Mhm.
I don't know if they
Yeah.
thought we were going to do it, but
Yeah, really.
I think we ought to just make sure assume that they don't know.
Yeah, Wilma's not here. She could give us some keen advice on how better to do that, I'm sure.
Well, I think it's important to know that the contractor has to hit that window. Like,
Yeah.
we can't drag it out for
Right.
3 months, and really not more than 10 days.
No, you gotta, I mean, the contractor last time did a good job with being in touch with the businesses along the way. I mean, they were, they had tried to develop a relationship with all of them. That helps, I mean, it does. And once we get going, I mean, you'll understand, you'll have pods of businesses you'll have to talk to when something happens. And it might be only 5 businesses that care about one particular thing. So Josh is just gonna have to do a good job with getting to know all of those individuals and assessing what their needs are, and then making sure they know when those needs are gonna be altered and not be met.
I was thinking about somebody like Carol's that
Correct.
sells
Good example.
prom dresses and wedding dresses, and
Right.
needs to be accessible during that particular time of year, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big key is that, we are gonna require that there is pedestrian access in these buildings at all times. I mean, there may be limited times where if you don't have no space, they gotta pour concrete right in front of the door, that will occur. But I think it's gonna involve me, and I'm gonna use Mary to help me out, like, we're just gonna
Yeah,
be.
part of Danville will be on the streets every day.
Yeah, we're already planning to get out the next couple of weeks, once we get through today, just to start knocking on doors and talking to people again. So, I hope we shouldn't catch anybody off guard, that's for sure. And I think this is gonna be, I remember I wasn't here for the 3rd Street project, but I was here for the 2nd Street, Streetscape. And this is gonna be a little bit different scale. This shouldn't catch anybody off guard. This is gonna be a pretty big operation. Like, this is, and the pace that we're gonna ask them to do this in, it's gonna be a different animal than we've dealt with in the past. So it'll move fast, it'll be disruptive, but we'll just, hopefully it's worth it. That's what I was telling them earlier. I think what we're talking about doing will be worth it. I think when we're done, they're gonna say, okay, sure, this is worth the trouble. Went through.
So, yeah, I just have one last slide, just to talk about what's coming up next. We're working towards final construction documents that will be kind of completed by the end of this month. Those will go to KYTC for final permitting. Like I said, we don't expect any kind of crazy pushback because they've been involved throughout the entire process. Another important thing I wanted to point out was that we are looking at the Wizinger fountain upgrades, and we know that the city has had issues with that. And the Streetscape project, we want to make sure the infrastructure is in place during this time and this work to make those upgrades to the fountain. So we're going to be working with Josh and Earl on those improvements. Once we get the permit from KYTC, the city will put the construction documents out to bid and select a contractor. And then, as you saw previously, the construction will begin after the grass span. So that's what's coming up. And left on the plate.
And to repeat again, one of the things that the Whisker Fountain, we're talking about trying to upgrade it to be more vertical, have additional water, like had been described along the way. This having construction around, to totally repeat the whole thing that we said before, being in construction all the way around it gives you an easy opportunity to go in there and make subtle upgrades to make it an improved fountain, more consistent with what has been communicated to us as expectation. And it provides a chance to make that space, when you go up there now and you look at that corner, you got 2 wooden poles, you got you have a lot of obstacles. You have a guy wire, for example. Those go away. And so you're talking about, and if you do that bump out, you're gonna bring out that space so that it becomes more street space rather than this little bowl inside the park. And so it becomes more part of the street a little bit, if that makes sense. While it's walkable and highly accessible, it becomes a feature that is easily recognizable as you drive down the road.
I sent Gresham Smith the picture of the old Iron Baby Angel fountain. And said, what would it take? And they said, over $100,000. I said, well,
Let's do something
maybe we'll do something not so customized. So we're gonna bounce around a few ideas. We'll bring something back to you all later, what we're thinking about doing there. But the scale's wrong. That's what we talked about a lot. The scale of what's there is wrong. It's, it needs something, we talked about, like, we probably need to put some, there's nothing to do there either. There's just a sidewalk around it. Like, there's nowhere to sit. There's no, we're gonna find a purpose, right? We're gonna find, like, what does somebody go to that fountain for? I think make it more inviting.
You ever been to a meeting?
Just in those renderings in a way that it's shown in a few spots. You can kind of see it there.
Okay. So still serves as a service.
Yep, it's still agreed. Yeah, we actually explored early on, turning those into medians that were raised and had plants in them. We talked about that, yeah. And we got a lot of feedback. People love them. They're very functional as they are now, so we are keeping those in place.
So we're blessed with a very wide Main Street.
Yes.
Although, right.
Yes.
And maybe this has been answered before, this is my first experience with any of the streetscape discussion. There are still businesses that put their waste blue cans out on the sidewalks.
Yeah,
Yikes. I mean,
that's
like, this is obviously beautiful.
it's related, but it's another project that we need to figure out what we're gonna do with those blue containers.
So there's at least some thought that they're gonna be going in, or telling them, you know what, you got 3 hours or whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
I used to own a business on Main
Yeah.
Street, and so I get it, but still.
Just to talk about it fully, we talked about that with Bridget and in the Heart before. We had, Bridget worked with the Heart in developing a strategy to eliminate those. There was this idea of some strategically located dumpsters that were hidden but accessible to the businesses. That does require elimination of some space on private property for the greater good. And so that's a conversation that will be ongoing, and hopefully we can get to a point where we achieve a harmony, really, so that you do achieve the service that is necessary for the businesses to be there in an aesthetically pleasing,
Yeah.
agreeable way.
It would be bad. if
Yeah,
we
no
don't-
one loves the can, no one loves the cans. No one,
And
you
I
know.
think it's a conversation that has to be had before construction, and I don't know.
Yeah, it's, hopefully through this process, I get a chance, myself, to build some relationships with the downtown folks, and we come up with some kind of solution. But you're right, during construction, we're not gonna be able to do that. They're not gonna be able to access the garbage cans on Main Street during construction, so what our temporary solution to that may turn into our permanent solution, right? Like, I think I hadn't thought about that until just now.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a good thought. There's gotta be something out there, because that's the number one thing we hear about really on Main Street is the garbage cans.
And then I have one other question. What is the longevity of, all things being perfect, weather, et cetera, of a concrete sidewalk? Before you have to start expecting it to disintegrate and all that?
It could be as long as 30 or 40 years.
Okay. That's
By
what,
40, you're probably gonna start seeing like marks where water has started to,
okay.
Yeah,
So
how much salt they put down
yeah.
on it,
Exactly that.
how much damage the tree roots, that's what's getting us now. A lot of that concrete, some of that concrete out there is original, and the concrete's fine, it's just been pushed up by tree roots around it. So, a long time. It's,
Before, it won't happen before I'm dead and gone.
yeah, hopefully before, I'm dead and gone.
Well, one of the other conversations we had as a sidebar over here was the idea that this has got to be sustainable aesthetically. And so we don't want to be too trendy, and we've asked them to be considerate of that, and how can it be incrementally changed to accommodate a new vision, you know, in 15 years, you know, what if X is really what people love in 15 years? How can that be incrementally changed over time so that Streetscape's not 40 years old the next time it's changed, right?
I guess I do have one more question. The parklets that the businesses will be allowed to, or encouraged to utilize, are there guidelines as to what they can do to those parklets that they are utilizing? Am I making any sense?
Yeah, I think so. From like the type of furniture they can put in, or the type of activities they can do.
Well, no, the things that they can do to them. You know, I'm assuming that they're gonna do it for business purposes, but.
Yeah, we need to come up with those. Bridget and I have talked about this. We don't have those guidelines now. Like what somebody can set out in front of their business. We don't have anything like that. And that's, we need that. That's a project that we need to work on. Because, you know, we even talked about, do we want to tell people what kind of tables they can put out? Like, do we want to, the city can't provide them, but maybe we publish guidelines about what the tables look like, you know, or, you know, the Heart could have some involvement in that.
Yeah, I just was involved in a really great webinar where they're doing a huge area and their philosophy behind that and what they're actually doing. And it encompasses a lot of different businesses. And it's a great philosophy, so I'd like to visit with you all about
There
that.
does need to be a single plan,
Yeah.
probably.
So the parklets were a bad idea, and the state took them out, and now we're able to put them back in, is that what we're saying?
Well, the state views permanent things differently from temporary things. I think that's that's the kind of the short version of, I can't really give you a logical answer for why what the difference is, but they see those differently. So they're okay with what we're proposing, you know,
No
that's.
problems with it.
Have y'all seen our wayfinding, the signs we gave openly?
What was that question?
Wayfinding signs.
So,
Anything else?
If you all are good, this gives us the green light to prepare the final documents and keep this moving. So we're excited.
Inform. And even then, January 7th, somebody's gonna say, or June 7th, somebody's gonna say, I didn't know.
And ex-mayor Bowling certainly does appreciate the flowers. I sat here and thought about when you talked about those flower beds and, yeah.
Do you hear a motion for adjournment?
Second.
Name say, all in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you all for productive day.